Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Who Has to Know or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by TrueFreak89, and you can find a link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Britt. Who Has to Know? Chapter 7. You're on time, Telly frowned at the sight of her best friend waiting by her car. It was a rare feat for Raelle to be ready before her, and even rarer still for a Monday morning. Tally usually had to drag the other girl out of her house, but Raelle was wide awake and even chipper as she grinned with a roll of her eyes at Tally. It's not that shocking, Tell. It kind of is, said Telly as she unlocked the car and tossed her school bag on the back seat. Raelle slipped into the front passenger seat and waited for her. As Tally started the car up, Raelle reached for the radio. She found a song she liked and cranked the volume up, tapping her hand on the dash as she hummed along. Tally's frown deepened. Raelle usually grumbled at Tally's attempts to play music so early. Someone's in a good mood, she said, scrutinizing Raelle out of the corner of her eye while she drove. The other girl was like a bear with a sore head most mornings. Raelle shrugged in response, playing Tally's suspicions down. She could hardly tell her it was because of all the sex she'd had with Scylla over the weekend. They'd both agreed that nobody could know. Scylla had a boyfriend, and Raelle had a reputation to keep. She doubted either of her best friends would believe she was sleeping with a girl she was supposed to hate, anyway. Raelle had seen a new side to Scylla over the weekend. The other girl could be as playful as she was serious, and she wasn't so bad outside school. Raelle was actually looking forward to seeing her again. Telly pursed her lips. They drove past the high school to go pick Abigail up, since her car was in the shop. She picked up on Raelle's cheerful mood right away. What's up with Shitbird? She's smiling. Abigail pulled a face, like the blonde smiling was something unheard of. Raelle shook her head at her friends. You guys are acting like I'm always miserable, she laughed. You are, especially before noon, said Abigail. She narrowed her eyes, watching the other girl closely. Did you get late or something? Raelle couldn't stop the blush that snaked its way across her cheeks and colored the tips of her ears. No, she scoffed. I'm just in a good mood is all. It's weird, said Abigail. I don't like it. Abs, leave her alone, Tally admonished her. It was nice to see Raelle happy, no matter the reason behind it. She drove them back to the school and pulled up in the parking lot beside Porter's Mustang. Scylla and the boys were just climbing out of it, and Raelle's stomach lurched at the sight of the other girl. She hadn't seen Scylla since Saturday, when she had spent the entire afternoon at Raelle's, though they had exchanged a few texts on Sunday. Raelle did her best to keep a straight expression as she climbed out of Telly's car, and Porter greeted her with a smile. Byron said hello to all the three of them, and Scylla ignored her point blank. For once, Raelle didn't take the snub personally. They were meant to be acting like nothing had changed. She let Scylla walk off without a word, but pulled out her phone and sent her a text. Raelle, I almost didn't recognize you without your clothes on. She finished the text with a winking smiley face, hoping the other girl would take it as a joke. Scylla was the queen of blowing hot and cold, as the past week had shown. Raelle's phone buzzed a few moments later on her way into the school building. She looked up from it and caught Scylla glancing back at her with a smirk. I almost didn't recognize your face without it being between my legs. Scylla's playful response had Raelle blushing from head to toe. She cursed internally as she pocketed her phone. Fuck. Now she was horny again. A state she'd spent most of the weekend in, thanks to Scylla. She felt like a teenage boy who had just discovered internet porn. Brielle headed inside and left Tally and Abigail to go to her locker. Scylla was already standing at hers and taking her time in putting her things away. Brielle let her eyes linger over the other girl. She looked good. Scylla was wearing a checkered skirt that sat above her knees. Brielle couldn't remember if she'd ever seen her wear a skirt before, and her form-fitting sweater clung to her curves in all the right places. Brielle slipped up along beside her. "Hey," she said, expecting Scylla to greet her back, but she didn't. Scylla didn't even bother to look up at her as she closed her locker and walked away without a word. Brielle watched her go with a frown. Sure, they were keeping their new arrangement between themselves, but it didn't mean Scylla couldn't at least say hi to her, especially when no one else was around. Brielle yanked her locker open harder than was necessary. She couldn't believe Scylla acted like she didn't even exist, like she hadn't just sent Brielle that flirtatious text. Talk about blowing hot and cold. Brielle wasn't sure whether she was coming or going with the other girl. She shoved her books in her locker, fuming at Scylla's snub. Brielle had to remind herself that nothing had changed. They weren't friends. Their arrangement was just about sex, as Scylla had just made abundantly clear. Brielle was fine with that. She wouldn't make the mistake of trying to be nice to Scylla again. Brielle's phone buzzed on her way to her homeroom. She pulled it out of her pocket and found a text from Scylla waiting for her. A smirk spread over her lips as she read it. "Free period second. Got somewhere we can go?" Brielle grinned to herself as she typed up a quick reply. She knew somewhere they could go that would afford them some privacy for whatever Scylla had in mind. Brielle certainly had some ideas thanks to Scylla's skirt. When the start of second period came, Scylla walked into the natatorium to meet her like Brielle had asked. She cast a pull a sideways glance as she skirted around the edge to greet Brielle. "If you're going to suggest skinny dipping, then you can forget about it," she said, her tone frosty. Brielle couldn't help but tease her. "That's a great idea, but maybe not in the middle of a school day. Come on, we can go in here." She turned and headed for a door in the far corner of the room, opening it to reveal a supply closet. A closet? Really? Scylla twisted her face at the pool noodles stacked on the floor and the chemical bottles lining the shelves on the back wall. "Seemed like a good fit for it," Brielle grinned, ignoring the way Scylla rolled her eyes at her. Despite her distaste, she followed Brielle inside. "Do you bring all the girls here?" Scylla asked dryly as she watched Brielle engage the lock on the door from the inside with a card from her wallet. "Only the ones with boyfriends," Brielle answered in the same dry tone. Scylla pursed her lips. She wasn't in the mood for Brielle's attitude. She pushed the other girl up against the wall and silenced her with a kiss that left them both breathless when she finally pulled away. "How about you shut up and put that mouth of yours to better use," said Scylla, a slow smirk spreading its way over her lips at the sight of Brielle, eyes wide and cheeks flustered. Brielle's deer-in-the-headlights expression didn't last long. "Yes, ma'am." She switched her positions, so she had Scylla pinned against the wall before she dropped to her knees in front of her. Scylla bit back a gasp. Despite her goading, she hadn't been expecting Brielle to do that. "This is pretty. Did you wear it just for me?" "I'm flattered." Brielle grinned as she toyed with the hem of the other girl's skirt between her fingers. Scylla bit the inside of her cheek to keep herself from saying anything that might make Brielle change her mind about what she was about to do. Brielle used one hand to hold up Scylla's skirt, revealing creamy white thighs that Brielle had become intimately familiar with over the weekend. She used her free hand to pull Scylla's panties aside. Scylla felt Brielle's hot breath against her bare skin, and that was all the warning she got before the other girl pressed forward, burying her tongue between Scylla's folds. "Fuck," Scylla cursed, her hands holding onto Brielle's shoulders and her hips arching forward as she threw her head back. Brielle's mouth was relentless. Her tongue licked at Scylla's folds and circled her entrance before being replaced by her nimble fingers. She eased one inside the other girl, teasing her and opening her up while her mouth latched onto Scylla's clit. Brielle licked and sucked at it as she slipped a second finger inside of Scylla. It didn't take long until Scylla was grinding against her face, her walls clenching around Brielle's fingers as she came with a cry. Scylla had a dazed, wide-eyed look about her as Brielle pulled out of her and wiped at her mouth with the back of her hand. "Fuck, that was..." Scylla closed her eyes and shook her head as she tried to catch her breath. Raelle was great with her mouth, and she knew it. Raelle grinned, the picture of innocence as she pulled Scylla's skirt back down into place. "Just doing what you told me to do, darling," she said, a hint of session drawl slipping through and making Scylla's inside clench all over again, as tiny aftershocks from the orgasm Raelle had just ripped out of her rocked through her body. Scylla moved to repay the favor when Raelle's phone rang, sounding painfully loud in the cramped closet. Raelle brought it out of her back pocket to answer it, giving Scylla an unobstructed view of the phone of Raelle and Tally goofing around that Raelle had set up as the other girl's contact picture. Shit. Raelle cursed under her breath at the sight of Tally's name on her screen. She's probably wondering where I am. Scylla reached down, snatching the other girl's phone out of her hand before Raelle could answer it. She silenced it and slipped the iPhone into a pocket in her skirt. Raelle opened her mouth to eject, but fell silent as Scylla cupped her chin and drew her up to her feet for a kiss. "We don't have long," she said, her hands working on Raelle's belt and undoing it with a clink. Scylla pulled down Raelle's zipper next and slipped her hand into the other girl's pants, her fingers teasing at Raelle through the thin fabric of her underwear. Raelle instantly forgot about her phone. "This hardly seems fair," Raelle gasped as Scylla pushed 2 fingers inside of her. She swallowed hard and licked her lips as Scylla's thumb traced over the hood of her clit. "I went down on you." Scylla cocked her head to the side, her lips curling up in a smirk. "Wear a skirt to school, and I'll consider it." "Fat chance," Raelle scoffed. Scylla curled her fingers, drawing a heady moan from Raelle as she nipped at her bottom lip with her teeth. The other girl almost came right then and there. "Well then, take what you can get, caller." They finished up in the closet not long before the bell for third period sounded. Scylla took off to the bathroom to clean herself up, and it was only after she left Raelle reached for her phone and realized the other girl still had it. "Damn," Raelle cursed. She wouldn't see Scylla again until the lesson before lunch, biology with Isadora. Raelle took her seat shortly after the second bell. Scylla glanced up from her notebook to roll her eyes at her tardiness. "I handed our project in," she said, catching Raelle by surprise. She'd forgotten all about it. "Thanks," Raelle mumbled, trying to act as she usually did around the other girl. She was aware of Tally and Abigail sitting across the other side of the classroom. If anyone was going to pick up what was going on between them, it would be those two. Raelle didn't have time to ask for her phone back as Isadora finished roll call and started the lesson. It was only after she set them more questions to work on from the textbook that Raelle could lean in close to Scylla and whisper, "You still have my phone." Scylla slipped her hand into her pocket and pulled Raelle's phone out, passing it across to her without a word. She'd forgotten she had it until it had vibrated against her thigh in the middle of the last lesson. Raelle took it from her like they were doing a drug deal, hastily shoving it into her pocket, but not before Tally spotted it. Across the room, she frowned at the exchange. Why on earth would Scylla have Raelle's phone? "Caller, Ramshorn. Can the two of you stay back?" Isadora said as the bell went for lunch. Raelle's stomach lurched. What had she done now? They'd worked together on the questions Isadora had set them. Abigail shot her best friend a sympathetic look on her way out of the room as Raelle hovered by Isadora's desk. Scylla stood beside her, her arms folded across her chest. "Ladies, I've read over your presentation. I'm impressed," said Isadora, looking at both of them. "I thought the two of you could do great things together, and I'm glad to be proved right." "Thank you, Professor. We think so too." Scylla bit back a smirk, her tone smug as Raelle snorted. The blonde schooled her features back into a neutral expression as Isadora eyed them both critically. "Good to hear. Keep it up, girls." "We will," said Raelle, her hip knocking subtly into Scylla's. Isadora reached behind her on her desk and picked up a stack of papers, offering them out to Raelle. "These are some of the scholarships we talked about last week." "Ah, thanks." Raelle snatched them from her and hastily shoved them in her bag while Scylla looked on. She didn't want the other girl to see them and question her, but her efforts were for nothing as they stepped out into the hallway. "You're applying for scholarships? What do you want to major in at college?" Scylla asked, trying to make conversation. but also surprised that she and Rael had something in common. She wanted to go into science at college too, botany in particular. "Yeah, we're not doing that," said Rael, brushing off the question, and maybe still smarting from Scylla's brush off at their lockers earlier. She dropped her voice in the crowded hallway. "We're having sex, Syl. We're not friends. You don't need to ask me about stuff like that." Scylla's intense blue eyes widened like Rael had just slapped her. "Fine," she said, setting her lips in a tight line and adjusting the strap of her bag over her shoulder. She stalked off ahead as she spotted Porter, leaving Rael to watch on as she slipped her arms around him and pressed a kiss to his cheek. A familiar feeling stirred in Rael's stomach. It was like her insides were being churned. But she didn't have a name for what she was feeling. She refused to accept that it was jealousy, like she had told Scylla. It was just sex. What did Rael care if Scylla had a boyfriend? Rael walked right past them and joined Tally and Abigail at their usual table in the cafeteria. Scylla and Porter soon followed, taking their seats beside Byron. Rael shoved her earbuds in and cranked up the volume on her music through her phone. Her good mood from earlier in the morning had vanished, and she wasn't the only one to notice. "Hey," Tally tapped her on the shoulder, and Rael popped one of her earbuds out. Did I see Scylla give you your phone in biology? Why'd she have it?" The color drained from Rael's cheeks as her eyes darted to the other side of the table. Scylla was doing her best to ignore her, her attention fixed on Porter as he told her about something that happened in his calculus class. Rael swallowed the lump that had formed in the back of her throat. She had to think fast on her feet. She was putting her number in for me. Emailing about the project was a pain in the ass, so we swapped numbers for next time." "Oh," Tally said, her smile unsure. Rael wasn't sure whether the other girl believed her, but either way, Tally let it drop, and Rael let out a breath that she had been holding. "Hey, caller," Libba called out as she took a seat at their table next to Byron. "Coach canceled his practice tonight." "Oh, thanks," said Rael. That was one thing off her mind anyway. The last time she'd been in a foul mood in training, she'd messed up all her dives and drawn Alder's wrath down on her. Moments after Libba made her announcement, Rael's phone pinged with a new message. Rael bit the inside of her cheek as she sneaked a glance at the sender. "Scylla, looks like you're free after school." "Rael, I'm starting to think you're some kind of sex addict." "Scylla, it's a good stress relief, and I have a lot on." Rael typed out a reply, angling her phone away from Tally, who had suddenly taken an interest and was peering over her shoulder. Scylla had her phone hidden under the table, and Rael watched as she read the reply, a scowl appearing on her face. "Rael, I'm sure your boyfriend could help you with that." Scylla pursed her lips as she sent her reply, then slammed her phone down on the table. Turning her attention back to Porter, her hand found his arm, and Rael's inside churned as she checked her phone. "Fuck you, caller." Rael frowned. She sent a reply, but Scylla ignored her phone as it buzzed against the table. Not one to back down, Rael sent her another. "Your phone, Syl." Porter reached for her phone, and she snatched it up from the table. She read Rael's last two messages and bit back a smirk. "Fuck me yourself, coward." "My place after school?" Rael watched as Scylla put her phone away in her pocket without replying to her. Her frown deepened, and she popped her earphone back in and buried her head, propping her chin up on her hand as she picked at her lunch. Rael's phone went off again just before the start of their next lesson. Scylla's name flashed up on her screen, and she rushed to open the message. It was one word, but it put a grin on Rael's face and brought her out of her mood. "Scylla. Okay." Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.